Okay, welcome back, everybody. I hope you had some good parallel sessions. At least I attended the one here in the room, and it was very, very good. So I hope you had the same in Jenkins and Mansholt, they're called. Now, for this next segment, we've been teasing you a lot about this because, as I've mentioned a couple of times now, there's been this Young Scientist Forum, and they've been preparing for a couple of weeks now all together to come up with their findings when it comes to research gaps that we need to bridge, but also urgent challenges that we have ahead of us when it comes to climate and health. And I promise you, this is the end of all the teasing, the end of all the suspense, because we're finally gonna have them on the stage to hear what their insights are and have them reveal their findings and the things that they find important. They've gathered here these past 2 days in Brussels to really do a deep dive on what they think are main takeaways that we should all take along. So it is with great excitement that I can kick that off for them. But this session will be moderated by this conference's very own youth ambassador. We've seen her a couple of times in action now. So it is with great pleasure that I would like to welcome to the stage Omnia Omrani, youth ambassador for this conference. Big round of applause, everyone. Yes. Omnia, I think I leave it all to you and leave the floor in your trusted hands.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So hi, everyone. I'm sure you still have a bit of energy for a very important session, which is the last but not least of these 2 incredible days. Today we have a very special forum, the Young Scientists Forum. We have 6 incredible scientists who have and believe in their capacity to leverage the science and the research that is needed in order to accelerate and effect the climate adaptation and mitigation action that we need, that we said that we urgently need throughout the last 2 days. Each of these exceptional individuals is going to, first of all, share with you their incredible work, part of the EU-funded research projects that they are all leading and working on. And at the same time, we're going to have, after these series of interviews between each one of them, we're going to have a panel discussion where they are going to share their key takeaways, as well as what's missing, what resonated with them, and equally they're also going to share their calls to action at all of you, as well as all the climate and health ecosystem, and what they would like to work together on. So without any further introductions, I'd like to invite the 6 of them on the stage, and a big round of applause as well. Amazing. Yes. Okay. Amazing. So first of all, I'm very excited to present the first 2 scientists who are going to do a one-on-one interview. First of all, we have Jetina Juliet. She's a data scientist from CESHAR, which is the Center for Sexual Health and HIV AIDS Research in Zimbabwe. And the second amazing scientist, we have Franco Forlano. He's a PhD candidate from Deltares. So you both have the floor.
Hello?
Yes.
Okay.
Is it working? Can you try?
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm super excited to be here. My name is Jetina Tsvaki. I'm a data scientist from Sesha, Zimbabwe, working under the High Horizon project, which tries to assess the impact of ambient heat on pregnant women, maternal health, and child through the development and tracking of heat indicators, which then guides the development of early warning system. We are not just going to do that, we are also trying to measure carbon emissions in healthcare facilities such that we guide the development and implementation of carbon mitigation interventions. We are also capturing sentiments from healthcare workers, pregnant women, on how climate changes actually affected their lives, such that we also guide the development of heat adaptation interventions. With all that, we are not just going to implement carbon mitigation interventions, but we are going to strategically deploy a carbon financial resource allocation tool, which will guide how, like implementation is going to be done. So all these researches that we are doing aims then to guide policymakers on how we can actually fight this global cause. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jetina. So my name is Franco Forlano. As Omnia said, I'm a PhD at Deltares, as a research institute located in Utrecht in the Netherlands. For my research, I'm working in Blue Adapt, which is a European project that the objective has to study pathogens in coastal areas and the exposure of human health to it, especially in these climate change scenarios that we are facing. Personally, myself, I'm working on Vibrio bacteria. Most of you must know it because of cholera. In Europe, cholera might not be the most prevalent disease, but there are other diseases also caused by Vibrio that could be relevant, especially in the future with the climate change. My project is focusing on 3 aspects. We have a case study on the Lake Heidelberg, which is in the south of the country. The first thing we want to do is see what do we have in there, what is the current state, and see which biotic and abiotic factors are making the abundance of these bacteria increase or decrease. And also here we want to try to improve the monitoring efforts that there are, increasing the availability of data and also having more modern molecular methods instead of the culturing techniques. After this, we want to see what is the associations that could be between algal blooms and these Vibrio bacteria. We have the theory that they could increase their pathogenicity and the risk exposure to human health. And we want to see what are the specific interactions we're finding here. And last but not least, we want to pass this knowledge into the lab and try to generate in-lab data that could be useful for model development. The idea that we have, me with my colleague PhD, is to create a process-based model for Vibrio that could be used for risk assessment and also as our early warning tool.
Amazing.
So, Jetina, I want to ask you more about your model. I want to know, have you been able to implement it in the real world yet? And how has the user's experience has been with it? How do they feel about the model?
Thank you, Franco, for the opportunity. So firstly, I'll just try to give you a snippet of what this carbon resource, financial resource allocation tool is all about. So we are developing a financial resource allocation tool that can guide decision makers on how they can effectively allocate financial resources. For instance, if we get $50 million to implement carbon mitigation interventions in healthcare facilities, how are we actually going to allocate funds for switching from high to low global warming potential anesthetic gases? How are we going to allocate funds for solar system? So that's where our Carbomica, the tool that we are talking about, comes into play. So our Carbomica is hinged on what I can call 4 C's. The very first C is carbon emission measurements. You cannot reduce what you cannot measure. So we are measuring carbon emission measurements in healthcare facilities using the AKDN carbon management tool, which is powered by WHO. Then the next C is on carbon mitigation interventions. So we need to have a menu of carbon mitigation interventions upon which users can actually select from. So we have tried to look for mitigation interventions which are applicable in the healthcare sector. So we have around over 200 mitigation interventions that we have found to be applicable in that context. Then the next C is on carbon mitigation impact size. We need to understand how much can be reduced when we switch from high global warming potential anesthetic gases to low. We need to know by how much in terms of percentage, which is guided by a number of factors, for instance, like the size of the emitter and also the size also of the mitigation intervention that will be taken into play, and also the geographical location. It also takes into play in trying to coming up with the impact size. Then the last, not the least, the final C is carbon mitigation costing. So we have been utilizing micro costing in costing our carbon mitigation interventions for assets and consumables. So for assets, we've been including the costing, the implementation costing, and also the cost that is used over time when you are trying to monitor whatever is going to be measured over time. So that's what basically our Carbomica is all about. Now getting back to your question. So Carbomica has been received very well in a number of settings that we've shared it with. So in Zimbabwe, UNICEF Zimbabwe has actually shown interest in using this tool, and we've even managed to publish it on that COP28 online prospectus group. So it has just shown the potential on how this financial allocation tool can be impactful in trying to mitigate carbon emissions in healthcare facilities.
Thank you, Jetina.
Okay, so I've realized that you're also working in trying to assess the influence of climate change to bacteria, and you've actually mentioned that you do have got models that you intend to develop such that we understand the tracking and also what we can do about it. So we would want to know if there is no climate action to take place, how really, what does your model tell us, if we don't do anything, what will happen to us?
So, as I said in the beginning, I'm only second-year PhD, so the models have not been developed yet, but we are on the way to do it. But I can give you a bit of information about what we predict or what we can expect if the current temperature keeps rising. So, if you look at the records for the last 40 years, both the abundance of Vibrio and the cases of vibriosis have increased in the North Sea. And this can correlate with the increase on sea surface temperature. And this especially has a focus on areas, in coastal areas, because there the temperature might be even higher. We have even seen spreads of cases and outbreaks in the Baltic Sea. If we take the case of heat waves, which every year are more and more common, these heat waves creates these perfect scenarios where there's a lot of exposure of humans into the coastal areas. A lot of people go to the beach, they want to refresh, but at the same time, since the temperature is higher, of course, these bacteria are gonna be growing more and more, especially Vibrio, which are very, they have very high speed of replication. And that's why we can consider, especially non-cholera vibrios, a very good barometer for climate change. A second thing that we also want to assess is the algal blooms, as I was saying in the beginning. In a simplistic way, I like to think that vibrios in the algal blooms or in high algae biomass, they find food and shelter. They are protected from grazing, they are protected from the sun, they have more food availability, and also, very importantly, they can even form biofilms on small crustaceans, on certain algae species. And this has quite bad effects for us, in the sense of there's going to be an increase of the persistence, and also recent studies in the last years, they suggest that there also can be an increase on AMR and an increase on the virulence of these strains. But we're still lacking a bit of data here, so for sure more research needs to be done. But I think all of these are the reasons why these models are so important, and one of the main messages that we had in this conference, that we need to adapt and we need to change our way of think, and we need to be prepared for the coming years.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And there are two things I really loved. One was said by Jetina that we cannot reduce what we can't measure, which is very important. It reflects the importance of the work that you're doing, especially that it has been already taken up by policymakers such as, he said, UNICEF and the COP28, which is amazing. I also loved what Franco said in terms of, using Vibri as a barometer to see how climate change is affecting. And as you see, like with extreme heat and already being exposed to coastal areas, you can see how disproportionate and the most affected communities are experiencing the virulence of this pathogen, and you're looking into that. So thank you for sharing your inspiring work. And a big clap for them before we move on to our next interview. Thank you so much. Now I'm going to present two other incredible scientists. We have Warner van Kersen. He's a postdoctoral researcher based at the University of Oulu. And we have Evelise Pereira. She's a pre-doctoral researcher based at the Barcelona Institute for Global Health. You guys have the floor.
Thank you for the introduction. Every time I speak at an occasion like this, it's always good to introduce people to the fact that I have a stutter. So especially people online, relax. It's me. It's not your connection. So last week, I defended my thesis about the respiratory health impact of livestock farming, also a very One Health related topic. And in Oulu, in Finland, I will be working on climate change and health within the Trigger project. And Trigger really aims to bring that holistic One Health approach to tackling the relationship or elucidating the relationship between climate change and cardiovascular and respiratory health. And the holistic approach really trickles down all the way down to the project I'll be working on, which is how do you assess exposure of an individual to climate change over decades. So really taking the home address and combining all the climate data that is relevant to that region into one climate exposure assessment and relate that back to health.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation, first of all. I'm, as I was introduced, I'm Evelise. I work as a PhD candidate in IS Global. I'm finishing, I hope, my PhD this year. This is the expectations for the next months. And my research is focused on health impact assessment on actually is between the relationship between urban planning, environment, and health. And I do in my daily work basically health impact assessment of the current conditions in cities in terms of environmental exposures associated with urban planning, which would be the air pollution, heat, noise, and the lack of green spaces, and how it influences the impact on mortality and morbidity in cities. I think we also look at how these outcomes is inequality. It's distributed in an equal way in the socio-environmental groups and in the society, and how innovative policies, plans, interventions can influence and promote better health for the whole or different groups of the population. For example, in Barcelona, with the superblock models, with green access and other innovative initiatives. I work within the Go Green Roots project, which is a horizon project that it's focused on nature-based solutions through a through participatory processes in each city, and we monitor the health benefits that these interventions is generating, positively or negatively in each city. So I think this is the main work that I have. And I have a question to Werner in your work. I think it's quite interesting because our work is quite connected, as we've been discussing previously. But my question is, what's your cohort studies revealing nowadays? And is there an obvious trend in terms of the population developing respiratory and cardiovascular diseases?
Yes, it's really good that you introduced the cohorts that we are working on. So we are at the moment really in the early stages of our project, so really establishing how best to go about using existing cohort data to come to this composite climate exposure assessment that I was talking about earlier. So we have two very large birth cohorts in the Oulu region, the Northern Finland birth cohort 1966. That's the year in which they all were born. And they were tracked over the years in terms of mental health, physical health, but also characteristics like education, occupation, which are all very relevant to take into account when assessing the health impact of climate change, as you are all very much aware after this conference. And what I always found very jarring about the One Health approach is that the social studies are remarkably underrepresented when you take a look at what they could add in terms of analysis techniques. So for instance, the challenge we have in compiling all the climate data in one climate exposure is that temperature, precipitation, humidity, it's all very, very interrelated. And there is this very nice analytical technique from the social sciences that we will be employing that's normally used to assess things that are very hard to quantify. So think of intelligence. You've probably once all come across an intelligence test that has a lot of questionnaire or interrelated questionnaire items that are then used to quantify intelligence and relate that to academic performance. And we will be exploring that same technique to see how all these climate variables can be characterized and related to cardiovascular and respiratory health. But come to think of the connection between our work, you mentioned urbanicity and the impact of health, and a term that struck me a couple of times at this conference was climate anxiety. And when I think of anxiety and mental health as an environmental epidemiologist, the first thing that comes to mind is green space. And I think there's a couple more people in the room that would like to hear your thoughts about the relationship between green space and anxiety, specifically climate anxiety. So could you elaborate a bit on that?
Thank you for the question. I think it's interesting when we talk about climate anxiety, because it's a concept that, honestly, I think it's from a perspective that we haven't had other determinants of anxiety, but climate. No, so I think, honestly, anxiety it's even beyond climate, and the conditions that we have that will influence our anxiety or any other mental health outcomes. So I think In this context, and then answering to your question, I think the green spaces has been associated with mental health and physical health and well-being beyond climate anxiety. And I think this is the main message that I want to bring here, because actually there is three dimensions that I think the green space associated with health. The first one that I wanted to mention is that the green space reduce harmful conditions. I think this is not new. We have been discussing here quite a lot these days. So green space reduce noise, or change at least noise from trucks to birds, I would prefer. But also not only noise and air pollution. And we know that noise and air pollution are associated with stress, with anxiety, with depressions and other physical health-related outcomes. We also know that the green space reduced the urban heat island, and I think this is something that we've been discussing here, but not mentioning green spaces as a proxy that could tackle this issue on urban heat island in cities. We are living more and more in cities, so it's important to mention the urban heat island effect and how to tackle it. In fact, we studied the possibilities of reducing urban heat island by increasing tree coverage, and we found that in Europe, which was the cities that we had data for, if we increase the tree coverage by 30%, more or less, we could reduce the urban heat island effect by half, 0.4 degrees Celsius, which seems not much, but it changed from city to city, arriving up to 1.3, and this actually represents the reduction in 1/30 of the total mortality that we have in urban heat island related mortality in cities per year during summers. So I think this is one main point for the green space. The second one is that the green space restores capacities, and I'm talking about people that are suffering from illness and can recover. What does this mean? As an example, in Barcelona, there was the Green Access Plan that I mentioned, which was to structure green corridors through the city and increase in street greening. And we estimated how this could influence mental health and generate benefits. We found that with the full implementation of the plan in the city, and thinking about implementation science here, we use epidemiological data that associate the exposure to green space with different mental health outcomes and apply for a real policy from a risk assessment perspective. We found that the full implementation of the plan would represent a reduction in 80% of the cases of use of anxiolytics, 13% of the uses of antidepressant, and 13% of visitors to mental health specialists in the city, and 14% of the self-perceived poor mental health in the city. We estimated the costs that could be related to these benefits, and we found that this could represent over 45 million annual savings in the mental health costs only in Barcelona. So this restoring capacity structure and power that we have in green space is quite important. Finally, I want to mention the building capacities, which is also something that green space can provide. And using the same proposal of the Green Access Plan in Barcelona, we found that there was the full implementation could also influence the behavioral and cognitive development in children in the different scores that we followed during the periods in the school from 7 to 10 years. And there is many components I'm not mentioning here, but all the scores would be improved in terms of cognitive development. So I think it's something interesting. We have many other co-benefits that was discussed here in terms of green space, but I would mention that there is two components that is important to have in mind, which would be that everyone has access to green spaces and that everyone has access to good quality green spaces. Because we mainly discuss about the many rules in terms of green space. We need to reach 30%, 25%, everybody has access. But from I'm from Brazil, so in a Latin America perspective, there is some studies that shows that even when you have green space nearby, if it's not in a good quality, you don't perceive that you have green space nearby. So you don't use it, you don't benefit from it. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. This is incredibly fascinating, both of you. I really want to highlight something that Her Excellency, the Minister of Malawi, said around in the opening of the conference, that it is that we have to go beyond, when you look at climate exposure, to look at the individual, which is exactly what, Warner, you demonstrated in the research that you're doing, looking at the diversity of the climate exposure affecting a person. And at the same time, I really loved the numbers that you presented around green spaces and the incredible potential it has with reducing mental health care costs, improving mental health and well-being, but at the same time, looking at the elements of equity and accessibility and the quality of the green spaces that we are providing. So thank you so much for sharing that. And please, a round of applause. So we have the last two scientists that I'm also very excited about their work. We have Andrea Lavarello. She's a PhD candidate from Heidelberg University and the World Organization for Animal Health. So I think you already know a little bit about her work. And then we finally have Nasser Fardousi. He's a research fellow based at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. So you guys have the floor.
Thank you. You hear me?
Would you like to introduce yourself and start first? Or?
Sure. Hello, and first of all, thank you for inviting me as well and giving me the opportunity to speak here. My name is Andrea. I'm a veterinarian working in public health. It might feel awkward to have me here, but bear with me, please. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Heidelberg. I'm trying to understand the relationship between animal infectious diseases and climate change. And I do this while I work at the World Organization for Animal Health, where we collect and study data, global data on animal diseases. Yeah, so that's in a nutshell what I do.
And I am Nasser Fardousi. I am a research fellow based at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. My research is about the impact of heat stress as an occupational heat stress on healthcare workers. I look specifically at how heat waves, high ambient heat caused by climate change impacts the well-being and performance of healthcare workers. And of course, the aim is to, at a later stage, to develop an intervention, adaptation intervention, to address those issues. I'd like also to acknowledge my colleagues in South Africa and Zimbabwe. The study is huge, and without their help, without their contribution, I think I don't deserve much of the credits as much they do. So, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Andrea. I'd like to start with a question, if that's okay. So, you said you study animals and our relationship with animal, and obviously we come into so close connection with contact with animal so often that we are not aware of it. We don't think about it. So, my question is: given the health risks posed by climate change, how do you think our relationship with animals is going to have to change?
Thanks for the question. You just say we come in close contact with animals that we often don't think about it. I will have to disagree. We have to think about it. Animal farming, domestic animal farming, it's something we've been doing for centuries. It's a very old practice for humans. And in some parts of the world, it's really part of their lifestyle. Maybe not in Europe, but in other parts of the world, yes, it is. And it really contributes to a lot of things. Not only feeding a growing human population, but also to the economy of a lot of countries and even entire regions, and also to their culture. So this vital contribution, especially to food security and nutrition, is vital, and it's especially appreciated in those parts of the world where arable land for crops is very scarce. And besides this, besides food, it provides also with other things. So environmental services, clothing, fertilizer, money banks. You know, the word livestock is pretty self-explanatory for those that you don't often think about it, about the origin of words, livestock. The pig bank in some countries like, or regions like Southeast Asia. And if you think about it, yeah, in some entire regions, it really contributes to part of the culture. So thinking in the context of climate change, more recently, it's true that the animal health sector, and particularly the livestock farming sector, it's been struggling and overshaded. All these benefits that I've been talking about, they've been overshadowed by very legitimate things like its contribution to greenhouse gas emissions, impact on the environment itself, wildlife, and other broader issues like public health risks and animal welfare. Of course, this is all very real and happening. It's about trying to find a balance, of course. And so to answer your question, because I've been rambling a little bit, we have to think about a way to transition, because beyond Europe, beyond countries where we produce livestock animals in these industrial ways that a lot of us know, there's traditional knowledge that we were talking about yesterday that could be used as a source of information to transition potentially into more sustainable farming practices. And about the risks to public health, yes, we do have knowledge also on biosecurity and food safety measures and protocols that we can still observe to make sure that we don't have incidents.
You make excellent points, and I believe also you have a question for me.
Yeah. Speaking about overlooked sectors, would you like to comment on what are the heat impacts on healthcare workers and what can be done about it?
Thank you for this question. A lot of impacts. Let me start by saying the direct impacts. We have the impact on physical health, like exhaustion and dehydration. We have the impact on the mental health and their well-being, the perceptive or thermal comfort. The second layer is the impact on quality of care and performance. Obviously, heat directly impacts the cognitive functionality of the healthcare workers, and by extension, there is a potential impact on their performance and quality of care. The third layer of impact is the cascading effect, which was outlined brilliantly by colleagues previously, such as the infectious diseases frequency, the potential re-emergence of certain viruses. So imagine a scenario where we have another pandemic in a heat wave. Healthcare workers have to wear PPE, which adds another layer of heat stress. So we have a potential risk for quality of care and for the well-being. What can be done about it, which is an important question. So a lot of interventions have been proposed today in terms of improving the healthcare facility infrastructure, using heat pumps, etc., conditioning. I'm not going to talk about infrastructural ones because they are already mentioned, so I don't have much to add there. But I would like to highlight an area of intervention where the is probably understudied a little bit, which is the organizational policy. Findings from the healthcare worker impact study under High Horizons have shown that, for example, the break policy, how long the break can be taken for. In the healthcare facility, this length or duration of break or the frequency is not sensitive to the temperature, is not sensitive to heat. The uniform policy also, there is a huge need for revising it to reflect scenarios where we have heat impact. And I'd like just to make the point of why this is not only important, it's doubly important. First of all, adapting to the heat stress in the workplace for healthcare workers is important for their own well-being and mental health. And the second layer is, as I mentioned, the quality of care. Why it's more important is we're talking about their performance, their cognitive functioning, their work accuracy, and it's essentially critical for the well-being of patients and health outcomes, especially in low and middle-income countries. Yeah, that's it.
Amazing. Thank you both so much. And there are things that really resonated with me. So Andrea, when you talked about something that we actually focused on in the session before around traditional knowledge and using that wealth of and valuable information to inform the research that we are generating is so important, and the idea of also co-production, especially when we look at the livestock and sustainable farming practices, as you said. But it's important, as was mentioned before, around using that One Health approach and bringing in animal health and looking at that when we look at the climate impacts on health. And another thing that Nasser mentioned that it's so important, which is now we know, and just recently this year, the World Health Organization published the Sustainable Healthcare Facilities Framework that was updated after a decade. But at the same time, there's still very little or an overlook or an oversight around healthcare workers' mental health and well-being, especially when we look at the transition towards sustainability and being environment friendly, but looking also at the resilience and the mental health and well-being of the healthcare workers who have to go through the impacts of heat, but at the same time be able to deliver quality of care. So it is very interesting and very important. So a big round of applause for all of you. So I would like the audience to, prepare your questions while I ask the scientists 2 important questions that we would like to hear from you. My first question to each one of you is around, we had these 2 amazing days full of incredible sessions and insights and a lot of multidisciplinary information, calls to action, policies, research. But I would love to hear from you one key takeaway or a session you attended and you felt like, well, it's missing this one thing that I would have loved to see. Anything you'd like to share as a one highlight that you will take back with you to your own countries and cities and universities?
Thank you for your question. So for me, one thing that I've learned throughout this conference is we all have a part to play, be it a young scientist like myself, be it a youth who is maybe in Zimbabwe or Belgium, or like a student, like we have just seen from one of our speakers who mentioned that like he got to be taught to use like TikTok on how they are actually spreading awareness of climate change. So we all have a part to play, be it policymakers, senior scientists, young scientists, we all have a portion like to participate such that we can fight this global crisis. Thank you.
Amazing, thank you so much.
On my side, I have like 2 takeaways about these 2 days. First is, I believe it was the health minister of Malawi that said, we have the papers, now we need to make the tools. And I really like that phrase. We have a lot of knowledge, we need to really put that knowledge on the ground and make it available for everyone. And the second thing is, I miss a bit of AMR, maybe. I know that increase in temperatures are also correlated with increases in AMR. And we are definitely not ready for the lack of antibiotics that we'll have in the future. And I think this will be also heavily linked with climate. So yeah, those are my main 2 takeaways.
Yeah, thank you so much. Warren?
Yes, well, a thing that really struck me also when within Trigger we began to work on reviewing the existing literature regarding climate change and health is that there practically is none. So the field really is emergent, as people already highlighted in the conference. And that means that a study like us, where we develop a new way to assess exposure to climate change, we will need replication. And it also ties into data availability. So if you're in the room and you have a data set that you would like climate exposure assessment for, please hit us up, because we will need to validate our approach in other countries and other cohorts as well. So please, it's an open invitation.
I think many insights during these days. There is the session that we had this morning on implementation science was really important to me, because I think it's my daily work. And, we generally are needing evidences that bring us or allow us to do some kind of analysis that connect with policies. And actually, I was missing this in the other sections. But it's true that we still miss also other voices in the implementation science. And we have some limitations in terms of it, and also infrastructural. Now, I think one discussion that we had in the session was about the rules that we have in the scientific background. We need to publish papers in high impact journals. Luckily, we have good publications in IS Global, because we are looking for a macro perspective. But if you go from a micro perspective in the implementation science, I think this is an issue. In Go Green Roots, we've been working on it, and I think it's quite interesting. But we still, I can say that I'm a bit privileged to sometimes having a horizon project that have this background. If you want to start from zero, it's hard to have fundings that assume and provide points, let's say, in terms of selection, when you have backgrounds on implementation science. So I think it was a good discussion in that section that I take from home.
Amazing, thank you. Andrea?
Yeah, again, like Evelise, I bring a lot of ideas home from presentations and keynote speakers and panels. But I think what I take with me are things that happen in between sessions, or maybe in side conversations, about really bringing the key actors or relevant actors into the conversation and engaging them into decision making and as part of the process. And I'm not only talking about healthcare and climate here. I'm talking about the animal sector, the younger generations, and for me, there's still so many things to be done in terms of outreach and communication, and just translating science into not only policy but just easier ways to understandable messages for all these key actors. And I think in the past, I've been very excited about the term One Health, but not anymore. I don't like it anymore. I was telling them yesterday, it's been so overused now that I feel like I don't like to use it anymore. Yes, we have to find a new term. But yes, so about bringing everyone to the table and considering their inputs.
Amazing.
I think that's, for me, what's needed and what we have to work on.
Okay. Nasser, you have the last.
There is a lot to take away, but there is one thing that I resonated with at a personal level. Can I get personal?
Yeah.
Is it okay? So there was this talk about by, I believe, Caroline Hickman, about the climate anxiety. And in her talk, she talked about her interviews with participants, and she cited some quotes. I have this sensation or perception that we are in a sinking ship. And after talking and listening to Caroline Hickman in her talk, I I have to admit, I bizarrely felt relieved that I'm in good company. Yeah, so that's one of the things that coming to this conference kind of added to me personally. The other thing is not personal. There was a good call for national registers to standardizing data collection and using like national registers for routine data collection. And this is in my research, we're finding this issue of going back to registers, extracting data. We really miss this framework that automates or makes it more standardized to collect data for climate and health research.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we started by having a part to play and the importance of having the tools and bringing it to the communities, to the people, but also increasing our focus on AMR, which is so critical at that intersection between AMR and climate change that should not be missed. And at the same time, the challenges which both Nasser and Warren talked about when it comes to data sets, when it comes to the standardization of data, and looking at the difficulties that many young researchers and scientists face when it comes to publishing and having that support, that mentorship, that collaboration and co-production. And finally, I completely relate to what you said, Nasser, when we have these climate emotions and how can we have the space to share them and to know that we're not alone in the feelings that we have around worrying about our health and our generation's future and present, as we are seeing right now, and the people that are suffering right now. And then finally, I will go back to Nasser one last time to get your call to action. So you all shared what is the key takeaway for you when you go back, but what would you like the rest of our conference participants and the different stakeholders to take back with them?
Yeah, certainly. I'd like to kindly ask for more research on the impact of climate change or climate hazard in terms like from an occupational perspective on healthcare workers. Healthcare workers are not high on the research agenda. Take this conference, for example. They are easily dismissed as, for example, they are not vulnerable, they're not exposed. But actually, I would argue they are exposed. Think about healthcare workers in low and middle income countries where the facility is not well equipped to face heat waves. Think about community healthcare workers. Think about health visitors. Think about those who commute to work. So there is a good argument to be made about why they are exposed. And secondly, they are vulnerable occupationally. The workload volume on healthcare workers, the exposure to viruses and infections from interaction with patients. Some of them are sleep deprived, so there is a lower baseline, and the impact of them, as I mentioned earlier, is doubly in terms of the well-being of the individuals and the quality of care.
Thank you. Andrea?
Yes, thank you. I think for my side, as you can expect, my call to action would be to really pay attention and try to take into account the interplay between animal health and human health in the context of climate change. I think it's become evident that there is a relationship between the two of those. I think the pandemic has made it obvious. And in the context of climate change, I think it's going to become harder. I think we've done great in creating indicators for human health and climate change. It's still a work in progress, but it's there, it's out there. For animal health, I believe we don't have any. But we do have readily available data sources that even if they're not made for research, they're out there, they're made for other things, but they're out there and they're public and we can use them. So yeah, that would be my call to action, to use those data sources. Data is available for animal health and we can use it.
Great, so we have a focus on healthcare workers, their resilience and vulnerability, as well as looking into both the animal and the human health and developing the indicators that are needed with the available data sets that we have. What do we have next?
Oh my God. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. My call to action, I think it's, you already mentioned, which is improve monitoring and better harmonize data in terms of data. I didn't mention it, but for example, I also study with a broad perspective of 1,000 cities in Europe and the impacts that we have in each of these cities. And they are in different countries, for example, and we have different data. We have data that are standardized, for example, in terms of environmental exposures, but we don't have standardized data for health, mainly mental health, and also in terms of socioeconomic perspectives and components. So I think this is something that limits us in the studies that we use to do in cities to really understand what is the big picture in terms of inequalities when it comes to environmental conditions in cities. We generally use or apply studies in 1, 2, 6, 10 cities maybe, in cases, or we look at different countries one by one. But when we think about big perspective, we really miss this information, which then will influence our translation for policies. And we also need to understand what is the mechanisms that contribute to effective implementations of policies, I would say, because we have this type of studies going on, but still there is some agendas that are not prioritized, and how to translate it beyond the governments as a big policy, I think it's important as well.
Yeah. I completely agree, and this reminded me with what Sir Andy Haynes said yesterday around the Cinderella issues, which is how can we increase the prioritization and the interest in implementation research and looking into evaluation and the standardization of the data, which is very important. And for mental health specifically, Sir Andy Haynes mentioned, as well as Marina, that mental health is still a big gap around lack of availability of metrics to assess mental health, let alone mental health impacts of climate change, climate impacts of mental health, as well as the data sets that we can measure around the world of how is that. But it's very inspiring to know that you already have that in Barcelona, and it's an example that we can all learn from. So thank you. Warren?
Yes, well, I've already mentioned it, but yeah, there's a lot of work done about or on air pollution and health. There's a lot of work done on temperature and health. Humidity is also often brought into the mix, but we really need composite climate exposures. And as a call for action, maybe to everyone in the room, I think it's very striking that we are over time on a conference about climate change on such a pressing topic. And it also aims at the importance of clear and concise communication about your work. And I want to stress that as well.
Thank you. Franco?
For me, I think it's quite similar to what both Nasser and Evelise has said, also about the monitoring and the capacity that we have to have indicators. Bringing it a bit more into my field, when we look at water quality, mostly what we see in terms of microbiology is enterococci and E. coli, but it's not only that. Like in the last few years, we have seen that there's also viral infections, there are also fungal infections or other type of bacteria that could represent a danger to human health. So the call to action will be, let's try to have a broader view on it, and also maybe try to upgrade a bit some techniques. We have been using culture for a lot of years. Now with E. coli, many places are already using PCR or digital PCR or other type of molecular methods, but this has taken more than a decade to produce. So let's try to implement the work that we have done here in this broadening of the spectrum.
Yeah, agree with the importance of diversifying our methodologies as well. Last but not least.
Thank you. So my call to action is in trying to find solutions that can actually touch even an individual who is maybe in Bedbridge, Zimbabwe, where temperatures can go beyond 50 degrees Celsius. So starting by knowledge sharing and advocacy do we have like communication systems such that an individual who is in that particular kind of place can actually understand what climate is all about, how are they contributing to climate change, and how also can they adapt and mitigate to climate change. That's one, which then helps policymakers when policies are set. It's easy for people who understand a particular topic to really take into policy. Apparently, it's provided in the literature that at least 4 to 15% is attributed to policy adoption if people they actually manage to adopt policy. There is 4 to 15% reduction in carbon emissions. So having that background, there is need really for people to know how they are actually influencing climate change. Building on that, I think the other gap that we actually have is we don't have systems that actually aid the smooth transition from policy to action. So for instance, when we were building our Carbomica, we had to engage stakeholders, trying to understand their procurement procedures and all that. So when we engage one of the procurement officer, we ask them how do you really procure your goods and all that. So one of the statement that program officer highlighted was, in as much as we do have going green policies in Zimbabwe, we don't have systems really that support that. We then go for cheaper goods, cheaper consumables, in as much as those policies are set. Then which guides to the third and final part that I think we should also actually try to focus on, is to evaluate really our mitigation intervention. How much in percentage are we reducing carbon emissions if we switch to hybrid cars? How much carbon emissions are we actually reducing when we switch to low global warming potential inhalers? So those are my 3 points. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And you made a great point around raising awareness of the individuals, which is what Joanna mentioned at the beginning, our individual responsibility to reducing our own carbon emissions, but at the same time, when we advocate for reducing carbon emissions in our health sector, understanding what it means in terms of cost savings and making the business case for it, but at the same time creating an enabling environment to incentivize the uptake of these interventions and the menu of solutions, as you mentioned. I will ask Hajar if we have time for Q&A, but I think we don't, unfortunately. If you have any questions, you have seen all the incredible work that they've done, and they'll be very happy to answer your questions. But before I give the floor to Hajar, a big round of applause for the amazing scientists. Thank you so much.